morning, everybody. Happy Friday, and welcome on into your Friday episode of FreightWaves Now. I'm Kaylee Nix here with Anthony Smith.
And on this Friday edition of FreightWaves Now, we all know you came for economy lately, but that's going to be coming up a little bit later on. But we'll have Nick Dangles on a training as a service program called Slync. But first, our top story takes a look at Travel Center's most recent earnings report, and John Kingston is here to help us break it down. John, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
How are you? Glad to be here. I was wrong the other day. I said I'd be here to talk about the employment report, but I missed the fact that it's next week, not this week, even though the last one was 4 weeks ago. So I apologize for that. We'll talk to you next Friday.
That's all good. Well, we'll get employment numbers then. We're still talking numbers today, just in a totally different capacity. We've got TCA, Travel Centers of America. Their earnings report is up and in. And interesting, considering that we just heard the news about BP and their interest in TA last week. What can you tell us about what's going on with their earnings?
Well, I'm going to miss these earnings reports when they disappear into BP and they won't be a publicly traded company anymore. What I actually didn't really look at that much of the earnings report, and they did not have a conference call like they normally did because of the pending BP acquisition. But the number that I went right to was their gross fuel margin. Now, let's point out that this is not just a diesel margin. Gasoline is in there as well, but the figures on gasoline sales, gasoline's only about 12% of all the total gallons sold at TA. So pretty much this is a diesel number, and it's really pretty amazing. The average per gallon gross margin at TA was 27.3 cents in the fourth quarter. Excuse me, I'm looking at the wrong thing. It's 29 cents, over 29 cents in the fourth quarter. It was over 27 cents in the second quarter, and those were the by far the biggest numbers I had seen in going back several years. That spread tends to be around 15, 16 cents a gallon, and fuel for convenience stores or truck centers is always sort of this thing to bring people in and then hopefully sell them other stuff, and that's how you make their money. They're not really designed to make a lot of their money on fuel. Fuel is really like a kind of a come-on. But what's happened is that these markets are so crazy right now. These diesel markets are so nuts. And you had such a significant downshift and then an upturn and then another downfall in diesel prices that all happened very rapidly, that the wholesale prices will track those rapid declines in the futures market, but the retail prices are not. And if in case somebody thinks that there's something nefarious about this, yes, on the one hand, a station owner will always try to hold their fuel prices as high as they can for as long as they can, but they're just not kind of mentally, I won't say mentally equipped, but mentally oriented toward really rapid changes in their price, either up or down. That's just not the way the business is. So what's happened is, in the fourth quarter of the year, you had a significant downturn in the price of diesel futures and diesel wholesale as a result, and retail just wasn't coming in at anywhere quite the same level. The result is you made a lot of money. Now, let me point out that I have no reason to believe that those kind of margins that TA reported are any different anywhere else. I think just the fourth quarter was really, really profitable for retailing diesel, and it tends not to be. So there you see that chart, and that's going back over the last 2 years. So you can see where the fourth quarter of last year and the second quarter of last year really stuck out with numbers well above what they've been. The question is, did this matter to BP? And I would assume not. I think they know enough about markets to know that what happened last year with retail margins was probably a one-off, very unlikely to be repeated, and that their calculations of what they're going to make at TA when they bring it into the fold do not include fuel margins of 27, 28, 29 cents a gallon.
So, John, we've got our big three kind of diesel fueling stations. We've got Pilot Flying J, you've got Love's, and you've got TA. Where does this put them in competition with those other three? Do we know what their margins look like at all?
No, we don't, because they're private. In fact, one story we're going to work on today is apparently Berkshire Hathaway lifted its stake in Pilot recently from about 40% to 80%, and then Love's is privately held. But there's really no reason to believe that they would have anything different. I mean, they've all got to be competitive at roughly the same retail level. They're all acquiring wholesale fuels at roughly the same costs. So I'm sure if we had the margins for Love's and Pilot and other chains too, they're probably all about there. I think really the conclusion is that the trucking, let's say the retail fuels industry had a really good fourth quarter.
And John, is there any expectation that the operations would change or shift a little bit after the BP acquisition is final?
No, except, I think that there'd probably be a more rapid rollout of alternative fuels. You'll probably see a lot more charging stations at TA. But, TA is not, as I mentioned, gasoline sales are only 12% of the total gallons there. If they're going to put in electric charging stations as part of their long-term strategy on the energy transition, they got to get cars in there. The TA centers are not really set up to bring in cars. I think a lot of car owners might be a little intimidated by going into this center where they're this like little piddly vehicle next to these gigantic 18-wheelers. So, I think that it's probably going to be a long-term plan for that. But charging stations would probably be one of the first ones to do, one of the easiest ones to do.
Yeah, for sure. Let's pivot a little bit, and I know we said we weren't talking about jobs today, but let's talk about job losses. We've got truckstop.com being now the latest company to announce some layoffs. Not a whole lot of details yet just about what's going on here, but can you give us any clarity?
Not really. I put pretty much everything I had into the story. The one thing that we kept out of the story, I guess maybe we can be a little looser here on TV, is that there was a discussion of it on the Boise Slack or the Boise subreddit in Reddit. Truck Stop is based in Boise, though their people are all over the place. Somebody there said it was a bloodbath. Now, who knows what a bloodbath is? Whether it's 2%. I mean, it may seem a bloodbath if a lot of your friends got it, but percentage-wise, it might not be a lot. The statement that Truck Stop put out was, just really had very little to say in it about, we're always recalculating what we need to do, and we're restructuring to provide a better program for the future. So kind of typical corporate stuff. But no, I don't have any details on it, except that they've got lots of company.
And John, with Truck Stop really being somewhat active in the flatbed area, does this kind of show any kind of indication to, some kind of weakness happening with that trailer type?
I really wouldn't know that. That's an interesting theory. I did cover the Craig and Zach show last week. The webinar that Craig Fuller and Zach Strickland do on the state of freight, and they were talking about all the layoffs, and the logistics so exploded in the wake of the pandemic in 2021 and 2022 that lots of companies added lots of people, and really on the tech side, and a lot of tech companies did as well, and they're making cuts. I think one of the more interesting pieces that I read, where did I read it? It was yesterday, maybe Axios, but and I think it all kind of ties in that the tech industry is still waiting for its next moonshot. You think about some of the things that we take for granted now, like search, okay? That was huge. Google was enormous and followed up on what Yahoo had done. And they're looking to make this next big hit. And one of the things that has not really happened that much is package delivery by drone. Well, Amazon was one of the companies that cut in logistics, and one of the areas to cut in was its drone program. So I think there's a lot of tech people hired in order for that next great moonshot that was going to turn technology upside down. It hasn't happened. The great thing for the rest of the economy is that so many other companies are looking for experienced tech people, not necessarily to go to the moon, but just for more mundane technology goals. And there's going to be a surplus of people available to fill those roles.
Got to survive on Earth before you can get it up to the moon. John, thanks for joining us this morning. I guess we'll hear from you next week for employment numbers. And we've got Drilling Deep popping up this afternoon, correct?
We do. It's a good one, too. It's about bankruptcies. Really, listen in. Kevin Capuzzi of the Benish Law Firm. Really, this is not just posting. It was one of the better interviews that we've had.
Awesome, John. Well, looking forward to that episode, and thank you so much for joining us this morning.
You too.
And of course, you can catch Drilling Deep here live at 3 o'clock or anywhere that you get your podcasts. Right now, we're going to toss things over to the wall. We've got our first carrier update of the morning with Thomas Wasson and Donnie Gilbert.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Thomas Wasson, of course, joined by Donnie Gilbert. Speaking of things going to the moon, it looks like outbound tender volumes are getting ready to launch. Donnie, what are we looking at?
Yeah, we talked about a lot of things this week, Thomas, and one of those is imports, and then, of course, how it's going to affect the trucking environment. Well, we saw where imports peaked up after the Lunar New Year, and those are starting to roll in. It's a 16 to 18 day transit time across the pond there, China to the West Coast direct. And then, of course, give it a few days across customs, really more than a few days sometimes, and then it's going to start hitting our numbers. And here we've seen it start picking up since the 22nd. So we dropped below 10,000. We got this little boost here. Now we're up to 10,500. So the numbers look good. Above 10,000, thumbs up. Problem is, this is probably going to start to go down here soon throughout the end of the first week of March. Hopefully not, but I'm kind of expecting that it will. We do expect spot rates to fall, maybe up to 10 to 15 cents rate per mile during the month of March, because we think it's going to ease up here the first few weeks, and then we expect it to bounce back. But let's go to the next chart here and kind of look at what's driving this. We see that reefer had already bumped up here, reefer being on the blue line. Then they've dropped down just a little bit over the past day. So is this the top of their peak? While dry van is continuing to climb. So it looks like dry van is really kind of pushing this increase right now in OTVI, and hopefully it holds above 10,000.
And it kind of looks to me like some end-of-month behavior as well, but we were talking about the Chinese New Year, the bump. Should we expect to see this as the early signs of it, or we need to wait a few more weeks for those ships to start matriculating in the port, then it converts to tender volumes?
Well, it's happening now. You look at the Lunar New Year, it was January 22nd that week. So it picked back up the bump after it as well. And now we're 20 or 30 days after that right now, and here it's 16 to 18 days to cross. So those shipments are in, and now they're making it to the truckload markets. It doesn't take a day. It takes a while to cross into customs, and some go rail, some go into warehousing, and then it gets redistributed and starts picking back up. It's not exactly immediate. So here we're 30 days after the Chinese New Year's, and I believe part of it's in the month, yes, and part of it's those goods starting to finally flow into the trucking system.
Random question as well. Outbound tender volumes, we're looking at van volumes as well as reefer. Looking at the conversion to things like intermodal, some customers have talked about how they want to return to their mix, service levels are improving. Is there a risk potentially that in spite of us seeing some little more imports coming back, a little more volumes pick up, that some of this is going to get transferred onto the rail for savings, or is it so cheap right now that it wouldn't matter, it's a wash?
Right, so there is a fight between rail and truckload, especially when the spot rates start dropping down as low as they are, and that's going to get into a lot of competition. But there's a lot of shippers that they have these stereotypes about what happens on the rail, that vibrates so bad that when they open the container when it arrives, that things are just everywhere, or damaged or robbed or stolen or lost. So there's a lot of shippers that just won't use the rail. So that's one. But the majority of the freight, and I think it's like somewhere around 60% that comes in off the ports go onto the rail. So this will help the rail out too, give them some more volumes. And they'll ship to key cities like Atlanta for the Southeast, Dallas for the Southwest, maybe Denver for the Mountain Prairie region, Chicago or Indianapolis for the Midwest, and Harrisburg for the Northeast. So they'll go to those key points and then go to a truck.
Circle of life.
The circle of life. So in the end, there's always a truck, but how it gets to where we're going could be many different ways. If it's time sensitive, it may go straight to a truck.
At the end of the day, our volume will find you, like Liam Neeson in Taken. Speaking of fun things, though, we're going to toss it over to Kaylee with our first look at top stories.
Thanks, Thomas, for that. Here's a check of what's making headlines this morning on FreightWaves.com. The National Transportation Safety Board is taking a closer look at how well aluminum protective housing covers on 3 tank cars carrying vinyl chloride performed after the Norfolk Southern train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio. 11 cars carrying hazardous materials derailed, and the NTSB is now concerned that parts of the aluminum covers may have melted while the gas was burned off and melted into the pressure release devices designed to reduce the possibility of catastrophic tank failure. The EPA has also ordered Norfolk Southern to start testing the area near the crash for dioxins after concerns were raised by its residents. Hapag-Lloyd's earnings are in, and even though the numbers are way off from the historic boom time of deep COVID, the company is keeping guidance high for the upcoming year. The company ended 2022 with $17 billion in liquidity, even after making several acquisitions during the year, putting it at $13.4 billion net cash positive with no debt. Hapag-Lloyd reported net income of $3.3 billion in the fourth quarter of 2022, down 20% year over year, with rates down 15% from their peaks in Q3. Even with market downturns, executives say that they expect a good 2023 with profitability front-loaded into the first half of the year. And the federal government is unveiling its plans for boosted rail safety in a show of support for the communities impacted by last month's derailment. The Federal Railroad Administration announced it wants to start conducting focused inspections on train routes that regularly see a lot of hazardous materials traffic. This will also be used to see if the railroads are compliant with regulation on track upkeep. The FRA also wants to improve safety procedures for hot box detectors, which measure the temperature of wheel bearings on passing trains. Federal investigators are looking into how an overheated bearing might have contributed to the derailment of the Norfolk Southern train. And you can find details of those stories and more up on FreightWaves.com or in our FreightWaves app. If you're watching us on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. Head on over to tv.freightwaves.com for everything else you might have missed during this week. Right now, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with our first check of weather, and we'll have a truck tech for your Friday.
The weirdest show in freight? Catch your nooner with Dooner right here on FreightWaves TV live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at noon Eastern Time, or on video on demand and podcast players whenever you gotta scratch that itch.
From the truckload quoting page within TieTMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TieTMS can optimize your quoting process.
Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. Drilling Deep is the place where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you have to drill to get oil and you have to get oil to make diesel, so that's why we call it Drilling Deep. Drilling Deep drops every Friday on FreightWaves TV and all available podcast platforms.
What does this have to do with freight? Well, I'm glad you asked. People are wondering what's going to happen with inflation. Is there going to be hyperinflation? When is hyperinflation going to be here? When is there going to be inflation? What's going to happen with inflation? Inflation. This is the sexiest topic within the economy right now.
Welcome into Friday, people. That's right, we have made it to the end of the week. Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. I'm Isaiah Buchanan, and this is Social Roundabout, where we take a look at what's trending on social media. Now, you know, we like to talk about charts here at FreightWaves, OTRI, FOTRI, all of them. And I found this chart, and it kind of relates to inflation. This right here is what we like to call the TFI, the Tooth Fairy Index. Now, what you're gonna see right here in green is the Tooth Fairy Gift National Average. That is what the Tooth Fairy is giving children for their teeth. And in the purple, you're gonna see the S&P 500, and this is how the two are relating. Now, this chart starts back in 2001 and goes up to this year, 2023. And as you can see, back in 2001, the average price of a tooth was less than $2. And now we're looking at the average price of a tooth being above $6. I believe it's $6.23. Now, that's a pretty steep inflation is not just hitting eggs and everything else in the world, it's also hitting teeth that parents are paying for. So just thought that was a really fun chart and that I wanted to show y'all. I also have this other video. I found this searching through social media this morning. It's of a girl who is in a jet and she gets put up against several G-forces, and her reaction with her face is priceless. Just take a look at this video.
How about that? Pretty cool? Oh, that's so awesome. How you doing? You feeling good? Yep. All right, we pulled 6 Gs. You want to do one high G turn and go back? Yeah. Like a Red Bull Air Race turn? Yeah. Okay. So in the Red Bull Air Race, the most time we did a vertical turn. So it'd be just like a half Cuban, okay? We'll get going fast. You got your head braced perfectly right there. Yep. Just tighten up your neck muscles, tighten up your legs. I'm going to try to put like 10 Gs on you, okay? Okay. So here we go. Tighten up your legs, tighten up your neck. 3, 2, 1, go. All the way around. Available. Looking for the recovery gate, and boom, right through the gate.
That girl's face absolutely made me lose it the first time I watched that. I never realized the impact that G-forces had on the body. I mean, I know riding roller coasters, you don't get nearly that much, but they have caused me to come close to blacking out. But I just thought that video was really funny. Wanted to show that with y'all. That's all I have for this edition of the Social Roundabout right now. We're gonna take a look at weather with Kaylee Nix.
All right, Isaiah, thank you for that. Right now, we're going to talk about some extreme and severe weather that came through Texas and into the southern plains last night. We've got a pretty strong storm system moving quickly to the east-northeast today. With it left behind some really devastating effects all the way across North Texas from the Dallas-Fort Worth metro in through East Texas towards Louisiana. Let's move right into it in Sonar Critical Events right now. We've got the radar turned on, and it's a hot mess out there right now. We can see we've got lots of heavy rainfall going on, a really strong leading edge of storms, and then up to the north in the cold sector, some mixed precipitation and some snow starting to filter in. Speaking of things that are cold coming out of this storm, the storm has so much moisture in it, it was a really efficient hail producer. So check out this video that was found on Twitter. This is in Sherman, Texas yesterday. All of that is hail. You know, you didn't step into the inside of a sonic ice machine. This is about 3 feet worth of hail that fell during a severe storm there yesterday. All of it's that little tiny pebble ice, which is what you get in your Sonic drink, but all of that hail falling out of one single thunderstorm. This is what happens when you have a really heavy rainmaker and it's just cold enough on that edge to produce hail instead of the rain. Crazy amounts there. Typically, your rain to hail conversion would be like 1 inch of rain is going to be like 6 inches of hail. That's what you get here. So we're not going to see that type of hail moving to the east today. Things are going to be more wrapped up into the rain and that heavier rain precipitation. So because of that, we've got flood watches and flood warnings in place across Arkansas right now. That I-40 corridor moving in through Fort Smith, Arkansas, down towards the Little Rock area, as well as out towards the east, moving through Memphis. That's going to be something to really watch for today, is those flood warnings and those flash flood warnings, because the backside of that storm wrapping around with some really heavy rainfall on top of that heavy rain that moved through last night and into the early hours of this morning. Further out in front, we've got a tornado threat headed to the deep parts of the south, including here for us in Freight Alley. We'll talk about that coming up in our next check of weather in just a few minutes. Right now, we're going to toss things back over to Anthony Smith. He's here with Alan Adler for today's look at Truck Tech.
Hey, thanks so much for those updates. And that's right, we have Alan Adler on now to join us for our Truck Tech edition. Alan, thanks for being here this morning.
Morning, Anthony. Good to see you.
Good to see you again as well. So Alan, jumping into this segment, we're talking the incubator and accelerator edition. What are you getting into on this edition?
Well, about a month ago, I spotted something and I just kind of set it aside because I thought it was a really interesting thing to look at. And it's called Camp X. Camp X is a Volvo Group project out of Sweden, which has actually expanded to a few other countries. It's essentially an incubator. If you think of like a Y Combinator or Global 500, the groups that, work with startups, in terms of trying to get their technology into the marketplace. And a lot of them fail, but a lot of them make it. And so Volvo back in 2019 started this thing called Camp X, which they were looking at, accelerating projects and things like that, things that the venture group at Volvo might invest in and that sort of thing. Now they've added an incubator to that where, entrepreneurs get invitations to come to Sweden and work at Camp X and then maybe move along the process into eventual commercialization. There's a couple of companies, most recently Wabi, which is an autonomous vehicle technology, got some investment from Volvo Ventures. Flock Freight has in the past, and so has Fortelix. These are all companies that are working with major automakers. In fact, interestingly enough, Fortelix has a deal now with Torque Robotics, which is part of Daimler Truck. So even if you get Volvo money, for investment, it doesn't guarantee you any kind of exclusivity or anything. It just gives them the kind of that first look. So, this is just a great opportunity to step back a little bit and look at how this is playing out, in terms of the trucking space.
Little guys who might have a really good idea, but not necessarily the power or the capital to fund that idea into fruition, relatively low risk way to kind of set themselves up and test it out, right? And then, of course, it gives Volvo on the front side that access to say, hey, look, we see what you're doing. Let's pull that into our space. How is that kind of give and take? It's really kind of the symbiotic relationship, right?
Well, I think, I was first made familiar with this back in my General Motors days because GM R&D was one of the first to actually launch a venture fund, where it would invest in companies. Then later on, when I was supporting R&D back at GM, we actually got involved with 500 Startups. That was the predecessor name to Global 500 Global. And we were able to get some visibility into what some of these companies that were most involved in technology that GM was interested in. They didn't have the runway, of course, to take on big projects, but it was an opportunity to sort of figure out what was possible. And I was fascinated by that when it was one of the last projects I did, about 6 years ago there, and I was just fascinated by it. And to see that Volvo now has taken it all the way out to the 3 stages. You've got your incubator now, and then you've got your development, and then ultimately, the opportunity to be funded. It was interesting last week too, or this week, I should say, that down in Florida at the Maintenance and Technology Council, the ATA's group that meets a couple times a year, Phillips Industries announced something very similar to this, although not all 3 stages of it, but rather teaming up with some companies that it sees as being very helpful in its business, which is tractor and trailer technology. And so they've got Marlin Solar, they've got Pro EV, which does wiring harnesses, and then Spartan Radar, which works on trailer camera technology. All 3 companies are going to be working closer with Phillips Industries under a thing that they're calling Phillips Innovation. So very similar, and it's interesting that so many people are interested in these young companies. I don't know that you would call this a second stage, because we've kind of come out of the SPAC world now where, young companies maybe not ready to be public were brought public, and we've talked about that really a lot here. But I think what we're looking at now is sort of that old-fashioned mining, if you will, of where is the technology and how is it going to be effective for us, and what can we do to bring it maybe to market for others, but also, as you said, Kaylee, for ourselves.
And Alan, there's another story you have about the acquired doing the acquiring. Can you tell us about that one?
Yeah, back to Torque Robotics. I thought this was interesting because, they picked up a company, or they purchased a company this week called let's see, is it Argolux? I'm not going to get that right because I don't have it in front of me. But basically, this is a company that works on sensor technology and perception technology for autonomous trucks. The reason I sort of played with the headline a little bit was because it was only in 2019 that Torque Robotics, which really dates back to 2005, so they're not a startup. They actually were a going concern, a business that had mining and other things that they were doing autonomy for. They were majority purchased by Daimler Truck in 2019, and so I just thought it was interesting that they've grown enough now, and we wrote about them I think last week or 2 weeks ago in Truck Tech about how they're evolving, and the fact that they're not doing their own acquisitions is interesting.
That is really interesting as well, because they're continuing to grow and you're continuing to see them put out product after product, right, and get really successful on that way to autonomy. Did they reveal any strategy for why they're going the way that they're going?
Well, I think in Torque's case, they've been working with this company for over a year. And I think that along the way, you start talking about, well, do we fit together? Is this something that would be good to have inside? We saw it with Aurora Innovation a few years ago when they picked up a company called Blackmore, which was a LiDAR company. And they've since sort of merged that into a group they call First Light at Aurora. Also perception technology and things like that. I mean, this is so important to anything that would get you to a longer term future for autonomous trucking, because without good perception that really knows what's coming, can see far out, as well as object detection, you're not going to be able to do anything without a driver in the truck. So everybody's sort of getting their favorites in the house, and I think this is sort of a trend really of the kind of things that we're seeing going on there. Also, it was another one. This one is not an acquisition, at least not yet. But I had a chance to talk to our friend of the show, Thomas Healy at Hyliion this week, following their earnings call, because they announced a collaboration with Hyzon Motors. And Hyzon is another company in the fuel cell space that we've written about. They're not doing too well right now. They've got an SEC investigation. They are at risk of being delisted from the NASDAQ and some other things that, really question its survivability. So when Hyliion, we talked about this yesterday, I think, on the show, when Hyliion picked them up, it was a little curious. So I followed up with Thomas about it, and it's interesting that as much as he can't say about what might happen there, he sure sees an interesting future. Let's put it that way. You can read about that in the newsletter today.
I want you to put your prognosticator hat on for just a second, Alan. If you think about where we're headed with these different autonomy companies now, having that competition space, and obviously some of them are more invested in one area than the other, some are pulling ahead. Do you think that we get to a point where we start to see one autonomous company getting ready to acquire another, or is that pretty far out that we're going to continue to see them stay separate?
Well, I wouldn't put a date on it, but I've been talking for months about that consolidation, and I think you will see it. I can't tell you who's going to do who, because it's just we don't know. But I think you've got to be watching for these kinds of things. I think that as we start to see more and more startups pair up with other startups, sometimes that's done for financial reasons, as in the case of the LiDAR companies. Velodyne LiDAR and Alster merging recently. That was a question of, neither company had a lot of money. I think Alster, which is sort of the surviving name of the two, had more money and probably a better customer base. So I think you will start to see more of this kind of thing. And when you start to track it, you're seeing companies that sort of make some sense together. And I think that's kind of what Thomas Healy was saying was like, look, Hyzon has a lot of history in fuel cells. They were a SPAC here, but the company itself was spun out of Fuel Cell Technologies in Singapore, which goes back to 2003. So they have done a lot of fuel cells over time. They also happen to have a robust truck sort of fuel cell, which is what Hyliion needs if they're going to put a fuel cell into their Hypertruck. Whereas most of the fuel cells right now were made for cars. You need more than one, and you have to put them together, things like that. So there are companies that just make a lot of sense. I mean, you've got your legacy tier one suppliers like Bosch that are into fuel cells, but they started in cars as well. So, doing something for the trucking space takes a little more work. And of course, Bosch is being integrated now. Their fuel cell stack is being integrated into the Nikola plant out in Arizona, where they will, Bosch makes the fuel cells, but Nikola will actually install them, on the line there for their fuel cell trucks. So I think, you've got to look at sort of who has what capability, right? And pick the ones that can do it for you.
It's like horse betting, right? Who's your winner going to be? Nobody really knows. All right, Alan, thank you for joining.
No bets. Yeah, not making any bets today.
No bets. Thanks for joining us today. We will catch up with you later.
Okay, thanks.
Right now, we're going to take a short break, but we'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now.
From the truckload quoting page within TieTMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TieTMS can optimize your quoting process.
Like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
Hey everybody, this is Thomas Watson, enterprise trucking carrier expert here at FreightWaves, telling you about my show, Loaded and Rolling. Now, it involves trucking topics for large carriers and even small ones that wish to be large. Anything that impacts trucking, you can get it there. You can catch us every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern on tv.freightwaves.com. We do it live. Welcome back, folks, to our second carrier update on this especially windy Friday morning. It's not Wednesday, I had that on my mind. But speaking of things on the mind, we've got a lot of movement, or some movement finally, in outbound tender rejection levels. It looks like 3.5 is on the menu?
It looks a bit more aggressive on here, but it looks exciting. I wish it were more exciting. But, over the past 2 weeks, we've gone from, about a 0.2% increase. So but basically 3.30 to 3.55. But it looks a lot better. But the positive side is, it's not this. It's not going down as much anymore. So we stabilized a little bit. Now, there's, of course, a couple of things that are really keeping a downward pressure on these rejection rates. Number one is the deterioration of the markets right now. Everything, spot rates going down. All these carriers are just accepting all the freight that they can. And, of course, the price of diesel fuel being so high. They need to accept all these because of the fuel surcharge. So both of those are keeping downward pressure pressure, and that's why we're at 3.55%. Now, when we say spot rejection rates are below 4%, and we've always that tells us that spot rates are well below contracted rates. Well, that's what we're seeing, and this is the story it's telling, and that's the story that we see. So keep an eye on the rejection rates. But I'm not going to. I broke it down Monday and Tuesday. Break this down by markets because some markets are going up. Some markets are going down, and this average is staying as these markets fluctuate. You need to see it at a market level and be able to know which markets are going up and which markets are going down.
Kind of reminds me of a situation where when people ask, what does 3.5% mean? Well, if you imagine you have a large customer like a Walmart, Target, Home Depot, Procter & Gamble, they want a tender compliance of sometimes 98%. So they want you to be at like a 2% rejection rate if you're considered in compliance. So like when Craig talks about if you want to see movement in the market, we need to be between 5 and 10%, that's when you can finally see that maybe I have a little too much freight. I have to finally start pushing back. Right now, this tells me we just need to put it on auto accept, pray a little bit in terms of trucking. I'm probably down in a situation where I'm chasing freight now. I've got spot loads that are taking me out of network and I'm chasing freight back. It's this weird snowball effect that operationally, 3.5 doesn't feel like much, but internally, a 3.55% whenever I used to be a load planner, and you probably know as well from experience, it's not a fun feeling as a carrier.
Yeah, well, 98% might be a little bit high, but what you were talking about is the service percentage. So of what you accept needs to be 96% or above. So they got to be really careful not to upset their customers by accepting too much freight and then not servicing it. And that's one thing that me and Tony talked about earlier this week was just because they're accepting all this at roughly 96.5% of their acceptance rates are right now, are they able to service them? And if not, some of these guys are having to bounce out the same day of and go to the spot market because some of these mega carriers are accepting all their freight. Now, the big mega carriers, they try, but they know there's some freight they're not going to be able to service, and they're going to push it to the next day and try to get it reset and redone. And that can snowball on them. But they plan on that because they need the trucks, they need the miles, they need all that freight, and they don't care right now. So they're going to push for that. Let's go to the next chart here real quick. We just got a few seconds left here. Breaking these rejection rates down, 3.38% for dry van, very low. Reefer, 3.81%. Well, reefer's on the way down here right now, and one time in the last 5 years I've seen reefer below, rejection rate wise, below dry van, and that was actually back last year when it dropped down, when everything started to drop. Flatbed, still at 14.49. It rebounded some through the end of February. If flatbed can hold off to about the end of March, we'll hit that flatbed season when all that road construction starts to pick up. So hopefully flatbed can sustain itself and stay above 10%.
We'll keep an eye on that for sure. Thank you so much, Donnie. Hitch those Conestoga trailers. They're no longer wagons. Watch out for the wind, though, because those frames are not as secure as you think. But that's going to be it for this carrier update. We're going to toss it back over to Kaylee and Anthony for our next guest.
Thank you for that carrier update. It's time now for our Friday Community Spotlight in the coolest community in freight. Running on ice is time to get highlighted today. Mary O'Connell is joining us back again to talk about running on ice and specifically cold transport in rural areas. Mary, thank you for joining us to talk about this topic that is honestly not easy. It's not as easy as it seems.
No, it's really not. And it's kind of what we learned when we were talking to our guest, Thermal Custom Packaging today. And it's one of those problems where, you think like, okay, if you live in a big city or if you've never really lived in a rural location here in the U.S., like, okay, well, there's a hospital like 20 minutes away from me. So if anything super bad happens, I can just go there. Or, the pharmacy has all the medicine that I need. And, you don't necessarily think twice about, the stuff that goes into getting those medicines and those goods to that pharmacy or how that pharmacy has to keep them cold. Well, it turns out there's not necessarily a CVS in rural America. There's not necessarily a CVS in the middle of Nebraska where it's just cornfields as far as the eye can see. But there are people that live out there and they do need that medical attention and those medical supplies that could potentially be the thing that they need to stay healthy and provide for their family and make a living. So it's definitely a challenge having to come up with solutions that keep maybe blood transfusions or insulin or any sort of vaccines, anything like that. Those have to be kept at a certain temperature so that way, they're still viable and they can be used when they get to the end user. So it's something that you have to kind of think about and go, how do I plan for keeping something cold for 5 hours after it leaves? It's too small to not go on an entire, reefer unit trailer. It maybe just be a couple vials here and there that someone can put in their car.
Right, and I can only imagine that it would take long for all these rural communities to have any type of infrastructure to be built out. And then, of course, there needs to be enough of a population for that infrastructure. Mary, when we're looking at technology, how can that be used here to kind of solve some of these issues?
Yeah, it's definitely the infrastructure could be there, but also why would you spend all the money certainly from a local government perspective, why would I spend all this money on building out all of these facilities if my town population is only 100 people? That's not something that would be worth that investment. And so when you can use other things to kind of supplement that. So through the use of technology, we've been able to have, for lack of a better word, boxes that keep things at a certain temperature. Like you set the temperature. It doesn't necessarily have to have dry ice, which is great and super sustainable for the environment because dry ice, not the nicest for sustainability goals. But you have these reusable totes and you can take them and set them at a certain temperature. And a nurse who maybe goes out to that rural community once a week, once a month or whatever, they can carry all those temperature controlled supplies with them and then also collect any blood tests or anything else that they might need to perform diagnostic services on. They can collect that and keep that at a safe temperature to transport it back to a testing facility. So that's something that, if I'm a local government, I might say, I'm going to buy a temperature controlled box and have a nurse come out to our area instead of having to build a multi-million dollar state-of-the-art cold technology cold storage available for pharmacy. So it's something about those swaps that exist and through development and technology and transporting of small goods and keeping them at a certain temperature. That's really been kind of the pro move because those boxes are also reusable. So it's not like a one and done. You can buy it and then once you're done with one run, you just hang on to it and then you just keep driving it back and forth and it'll last for 5, 10, 15 years, however long you need it. And that cuts down, it's an upfront cost, but long term it could be some savings.
So the COVID-19 pandemic really highlighted the disparity that rural communities have when it comes to their cold storage capabilities, specifically because the two main vaccines were both so temperature sensitive. And that was what prevented a lot of vaccine rollout to rural communities and also to countries who have underdeveloped cold storage infrastructure themselves, not just in America, globally. Do we see this technology now starting to expand across the globe and being used in medical settings, but also in other settings across the globe as well?
Absolutely. So one of the things that happened here in the U.S. was that LA schools, they had some of these boxes sent home to give vaccines to some kids, and whether that's COVID, chickenpox, all the vaccines that you feel like you have to get a shot every time you go to the doctor when you're little. So they sent some of those home during the pandemic just to, keep kids current and keep them healthy. And then also what they ended up doing with these these boxes that they had gotten, they started using them for like the backpacks for like the backpack for schools or program, where they could send meals home with kids for the weekend, so that way those facing food insecurity, they could still have food over the weekend. So this technology has helped not only, you know, people in a city, but in rural America. But this is also something extremely applicable to developing nations, because I don't know if you like have spent a lot of time or done some research on third world or developing countries. Their cold storage infrastructure, not there. It's just not there yet for something that needs to be kept super cold. But those people do still need these life-saving medications and any sort of, like, they do still have medical needs. So the fact that this is so transportable and something that you can just toss on a truck and like just a pickup truck and send it out with people is absolutely game changing. And it's really improving that quality of life and that health for people pretty much all over the world.
And Mary, speaking of some crossovers from implications in cities to rural, one of the big things, of course, kind of making this way into some cities is around drone technology. Do we see potentially in the future, maybe 5-10 years from now, where drones could be used as an application to kind of help get some of those goods in and out of rural areas?
I don't even think it's 5 to 10 years from now. I think it's going to happen over the next few years, because we've seen it in a lot of that hurricane recovery efforts that happened down in Florida this past year. I believe it was I will always mispronounce the name of this island, and for that I'm very sorry. I think it's Sanibel Island. That they were their bridge got taken off in that hurricane, so they were disconnected from the mainland, and people were using drones to send in medical supplies, food, anything that people needed, just to help people, you know, stay alive after a hurricane before the infrastructure got built up, because bridges like that just don't get repaired overnight. So it was going to be a while. So a new solution had to be developed to get people the goods and medicine and everything that they needed to stay alive and help repair the infrastructure on the island. So I don't think that it's 5 years off. I think it's probably a year or less off, where we can start using drone technology to, transport goods and cold storage stuff. I think that will happen probably sooner than we think.
I think you're exactly right, and you nailed the pronunciation. It's Sanibel Island. You got this. No bets. Thanks for joining us today. We will catch up with you later.
Thanks, guys.
Right now, we're going to take a short break, but we'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now.
Welcome back to another edition of Check Call. Let's go. Nobody works for free, so why should we be expecting our drivers to? Okay, let's just get it together now. What are some of those proactive steps that you can start taking now? For myself, I would like the Earth to still be here for a little bit longer, but is a hot dog a sandwich?
Oh, okay. Is pizza an open-faced sandwich? It's bread.
I have been ready for this question. I've seen the show.
We're all in this together.
Thanks for making me hungry. Now I want a hot dog.
You're welcome. Catch episodes of Check Call Tuesdays at 12:30 on FreightWaves TV. Keep up with all things Check Call on freightwaves.com/checkcall. See you on the internet.
From the truckload quoting page within TIE-TMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TIE-TMS can optimize your quoting process.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. It's time for our second check of the weather this morning. We're talking about the strong system marching to the east this morning and into this afternoon. What we can expect here is it moves fairly quickly throughout the deep south this morning. So let's take a look in sonar critical events right now. We've got that radar up, and as I mentioned earlier, it's kind of a mess. And what we're going to be watching here across the southeast, specifically from central Alabama through Georgia into East Tennessee, is going to be 2 rounds of showers and thunderstorms. One this morning developing on the front side of that. We can already see that starting to pop up to the south of Birmingham along that I-20-59 corridor. And then the main line of storms, which is currently moving just through the central parts of Mississippi. With this, we have a tornado watch in place from central Mississippi eastward. That does include the Nashville metro right now and into Huntsville, Alabama. We can anticipate to see this watch extend into the eastward as well as the morning continues to go on. What's going to be more impactful, though, than the tornado threat will be the high winds that come behind this cold front. Everything from the areas of Memphis eastward, so through Tennessee, then from Jackson, Mississippi, all the way down through southern Alabama into Georgia. We've got wind advisories in place there, and then here in eastern Tennessee, Chattanooga specifically, up through the Nashville area, high wind warnings in place starting today, and these are going to last all the way through the evening hours tonight. So yes, we have the tornado threat on the front side. The bigger deal going to be those strong winds on the backside, as we'll have sustained winds between about 50 to 65 miles an hour, gusts 75 to 80 in some places. So just because our tornado threat is limited doesn't mean that those strong wind gusts aren't going to have a severe impact. With this, we could be looking at damages to trees, downed power lines. Drivers on the roadways need to be extremely careful, especially on I-65 here, moving directly north to south. Those crosswinds coming across from the west to the east are going to be very dangerous today. Also need to worry about damages to buildings and possibly other infrastructure in the areas as those winds sweep on through. Thing to remember, of course, is that it doesn't take tornado winds to get that severe damage. Those straight line winds can be just as bad. And with them sustained following that heavy rainfall, ground is going to be saturated. It's going to be really easy for things to topple over. So just be super careful today and into the evening hours tonight. We'll continue to talk about weather coming up in our second hour of FreightWaves Now. Right now, we're going to toss things back over to Isaiah Buchanan.
Welcome into Social Roundabout, everyone. That's right, we have officially made it to Friday. Only a few more hours till the weekend. So go ahead and put your feet up, relax. It's gonna be a fun time. I wanna talk about a story here on this segment of the Social Roundabout involving a local restaurant here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. So recently there was someone who stole an Audi and backed into a restaurant called Mike's Hole in the Wall. It broke their doors. He also stole $460 out of their till. Now, Mike's has turned this bad situation for them into a positive. They now have a new drink on their menu. It's called the A460, and I'm gonna go ahead and assume that you can figure out what that stands for. So now they're offering the A460, and guess how much it costs? $4.60. So when life gives you lemons, you use it to make sweet, sweet lemonade. I just wanted to share that quick story with y'all real quick. Also, if you're looking for something to do this weekend, Creed 3 is now out in theaters. This is the third installment of the Creed series. This one is directed by Michael B. Jordan himself. He is also the star of the movie. And the plot goes a little bit like this. He is revisited by an old friend of his who has been in jail for several years. And that friend is actually coming to claim his title. So now Creed has to stand up to his good friend, who is played by the great Jonathan Majors, who has been in a lot recently, and he has to defend his title. And I am super excited about this movie. Both the Creed movies have been fantastic. It's actually certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. It had, I believe, an 87 or 88 by critics, and then it had over a 90, I believe 92 score by audiences. So far this movie is getting a lot of great feedback. So if you're looking for something to do this weekend, then go check out that movie. That's all I have for this edition of the Social Roundabout right now. I'm gonna toss things back over to Kaylee and Anthony. They're gonna tell us what's coming up here in the next few weeks at FreightWaves.
All right, Isaiah, thank you for that update. We've got lots of great content coming up for the rest of your month of March, including our next virtual event, which is about 2 weeks away, just a little less.
That's right. That's going to be Supply Chain Meets FinTech, and that's going to be going on during March 15th. And that is going to be one where, of course, Kaylee, free to register. And once you do, you're eligible for a free giveaway.
Absolutely. We had this event last year as well in the fall, and I think this one's super impactful because that intersection of supply chain and financial technology is paralleled right now, right? Like you can't separate the two. So it's going to be very interesting. Lots of great content. Coming up after that, we've got our 3PL Summit, which is the first week of April 5th, right here on FreightWaves. And of course, got to start making your travel plans right now for the future of supply chain in Cleveland, Ohio.
That's right. So we are getting out there to Ohio. Love to see everyone there. Right now, we're going to take a look at the last 24 hours in freight and take a short break, but we'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now.
The weirdest show in freight? Catch your nooner with Dooner right here on FreightWaves TV live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at noon Eastern Time or on video on demand and podcast players whenever you gotta scratch that itch.
From the truckload quoting page within TieTMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TieTMS can optimize your quoting process.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. It's time for your 10 a.m. check of top stories this morning. Hapag-Lloyd's earnings are in, and even though the numbers are way off from the historic boom time of deep COVID, the company is keeping guidance high for the upcoming year. The company ended 2022 with $17 billion in liquidity, even after making several acquisitions during the year, putting it at $13.4 billion net cash positive with no debt. Hapag-Lloyd reported net income of $3.3 billion in the fourth quarter, down 20% year over year, with rates down 15% from their peaks in Q3. Even with the market downturns, executives say that they expect 2023 to be a good year, with profitability loaded into the first half of the year. The federal government is unveiling plans for a boosted rail safety and a show of support for the communities impacted by last month's derailment. The Federal Railroad Administration announced it wants to start conducting focused inspections on train routes that regularly see a lot of hazardous materials traffic. This will also be used to see if the railroads are compliant with regulation on track upkeep. The FRA also wants to improve safety procedures for hotbox detectors, which measure the temperature of wheel bearings on passing trains. Federal investigators are currently looking into how an overheated bearing might have contributed to the derailment of the Norfolk Southern train. Waymo and Aurora have asked the FMCSA for a 5-year exemption on their highly automated trucks to exempt them from needing to deploy traditional roadside warning devices like reflective signs and flares. The companies say that their devices for warning motorists of a stopped truck are safe enough to replace the existing tech. And if the FMCSA approves the exemption, the two groups would use cab-mounted beacons instead. Each company has tested their safety devices separately, but some critics believe that the safety precedent that would be set with this exemption would simply not be enough. Digital freight brokerage Transfix announced CEO and President Lily Shen is stepping down after 5 years with the company, effective immediately. She will be replaced with co-founder and Chief Technology Officer Jonathan Salama. Shen will remain as an advisor during the transition, and Salama will remain as a member on the Transfix board of directors. Shen is credited with driving Transfix's platform strategy and product offerings over her tenure, but also oversaw the planning and withdrawal of an initial public offering that was set to go last fall. And freight forwarder Kuehne + Nagel took a hit to its logistics profit for the fourth quarter of 2022, but still reported its second best quarter ever despite the plunging market conditions. Operating income for the quarter dipped 43% year over year. Earnings before taxes and interest came in at $685.5 million, just behind the same period set in 2021. The freight forwarder saw a huge drop in operating profit, specifically on the air logistics side, with that sector sliding down 50% year over year to $277 million. Volumes were down 15% lower than 2021. And you can find details of those stories and much more up on FreightWaves.com. If you're watching us on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe and give us a follow on social media as well. Head on over to tv.freightwaves.com for anything you might have missed during the week. Right now, we're going to toss it over to Thomas and Donnie for our next carrier update.
Thank you, Kaylee. Welcome to the first carrier update of the start of the second hour of the show, Kicking It Radio style. Now, Donnie, we talked about rejection rates, reefer and van. I like this, putting it in perspective, just to the extent of how crazy things were and how it now feels uncrazy things are.
Yeah. Step back here and look behind you, looking at 2019, even in the year of 2019, the bust year, how much higher reefer rejection rates were than dry van. As we went through 2019, 2020, the shutdown, they narrowed, and then of course reefer shot up here above. I know it broke 50% at some points, where dry van stayed around this 30%. Then, of course, they dropped back down. Now, at one point here in 2022, we see where reefer actually dropped below dry van just for like a day and right around that 10% mark. Well, now we're at historic lows for reefer. And there possibility they could drop below dry van again. Reefer's at, 3.3% for dry van, and reefer's at 3.8. So they're within 0.5 index points here, 50 index points of passing each other again, which again would put reefer at historic lows. There has been one time where reefer rejection rates have been lower, and that was during the shutdown. I believe reefer rejection rates dropped to like 2.81%.
Exactly. That's what's so fascinating. You can almost imagine in this dead space here, truckload capacity. If we just had a marker, we had the interactive board, we could right here, when you're looking at rejections and making sense of it, all that pressure and weight of excess, and especially for reefer, that's what's fascinating. You think reefer would hold up better, but all the folks who invest in the equipment, the ones who can get a hold of the equipment, that's going to be a little tricky because reefer's traditionally higher value on rates, a little bit more margin because the extra costs. Looking at the outlook, do you think we're just going to buy a bunch of frozen foods coming up? Or?
Let's go to the next chart. Let's see if I brought this one up next. All right, so yes, this is what we're looking at. What you were just saying, but what it costs to buy a reefer, run a reefer, and how we're looking at rejection rates. We'll step behind here and let's look at contracted rates. This is reefer here in the pink. This is dry van. Normally to run a reefer is about 20, 25 cents a mile more expensive. The equipment's more, truck's the same, the trailer's more expensive. It's more upkeep on the freezer unit. Well, during we shut down right here, and then during COVID, dry van took off immediately. There was a hesitation, and then reefer started to take off several months later. Well, these are contracted rates that we're looking at. For a long time now, dry-in has been more expensive than reefer. If you call this normal, where are we at now? We're not back to normal. Dry-in is still above reefer, and it's only 9 cents now. It used to be a big gap. Now it's down to 9 cents. To get back to normal, should this cross? Well, you'd think, why would you run more expensive equipment and get less rate per miles? It's going to have to, because either they're going to start hanging up their trucks, either going to dry-in or getting out altogether. Now, we have nothing coming up to really boost dry-in in March and April. Not a lot. We got kind of the beginnings of peak produce season starting into March, and it'll strengthen as we get through April and May, and then really start taking off near the end of May. And that could be where we see this reefer get pushed back up above drive-in, and that get us back to what, quote, we call normal. And hopefully not at around $2 a mile where we saw it hovering over here at maybe $2.20, $2.25. But this is something to watch out about. Have we completely normalized yet?
I think we still have another 10 to 15% to go. We hear about that anecdotally. We see on RFPs we may try to get another 10%. That 254 may turn into like a 225 in the next 6 months.
I don't think we can call anything normal till at least these two have crossed back up to something like what we see right here behind you.
Exactly. Thanks so much, Donnie, for that look at rates as well. That's going to be it for this third carrier update. We're going to toss it back over to Anthony and Kaylee for our next guest.
All right, Thomas, thank you for that. We're going to welcome in our next live guest. We've got Nick Dangles, who's the co-founder over at Kinetic. And Nick, we are super excited to welcome you onto the show to get some extra perspective on the Slync program. So thanks for being here.
Hey guys, thanks for having me on. Yeah, I'd love to tell you a little bit more about Slync. It's a training as a service platform for the transportation industry. It's a joint venture between Kinetic and Metaphora, and training tends to be an area where the industry really struggles. And I mean that from both a new hire perspective and a continuing education, professional development perspective. So we put together Slync to help deliver training more effectively, to help decrease ramp times and improve retention, and also to lessen what we call the management burden of training.
And Nick, when we're talking about training, it's such a crucial part with onboarding. Why is it so overlooked from the majority of companies?
It's a good question. And it's not overlooked because people think it's unimportant. It just rarely gets prioritized. If you look at the brokerage environment, people are busy. It's a really hectic environment. A lot of time managers are responsible for training and they have other things to do. And also, brokers just want to get people on the floor as quickly as possible a lot of the time. And they err on the side of putting bodies on the floor, even if they aren't fully trained or productive bodies.
I think that the piece of that also can't be overstated is the fact that if you are not making those cold calls and not closing those deals, you're not making money for the company, right? So it can kind of be hard to get out of that mindset of, okay, we've got to take our broker off the floor and get them out of that money-making capacity and to take time to be trained. But the mindset should be completely different, right? More training should equal a better broker, therefore more money coming into your business. It's just that investment that you have to make. How does Slync now help really kind of make these brokerages or make these companies see a better investment in their time? That training as a service platform makes them more likely to want to trade because it helps them do it more efficiently.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, training is immensely important. And at Slync, I'm going to talk about this from kind of two perspectives. First, from a new hire perspective, I mean, you hit on this a second ago, Kaylee. It's pretty straightforward. If you want to set somebody up for failure, don't train them. And you can easily look up statistics on how much more productive someone is after being trained compared to just throwing them into things. Or you can even talk about the cost of a bad hire, right? If somebody quits after 6 months because you didn't give them the training to do their job, that costs companies something crazy like 15 or 20K. To me, almost the more interesting part is when it comes to experienced hires and continuing education. Think about the skills that you need to broker freight at a high level. I mean, you're using things like communication and conflict resolution, problem solving every single day, even financial literacy when you start looking a little more closely at your book of business. It's just such a demanding job from a skills perspective, but very few people get trained on all of them. And like, I hear this depressing phrase periodically, or a variant of it, where someone's been in the industry for a long time and they say, hey, like, I brokered freight for 10 years, but all I really learned was the rate from Chicago to Atlanta. And that sucks because there's just so much more that goes into brokerage, but talented people leave because they don't get the training that they need to do well.
And Nick, that's going to be the next question. Can you talk to around how it's important for retention efforts and really keeping top talent around?
Oh yeah, I mean, training and retention go hand in hand, particularly for like the newer generation coming into the industry. I mean, they want personal and professional growth. They want training. They want career advancement. So even if you're a smaller brokerage with a flat management structure and you might not have opportunities for career advancement, what you can offer is training. This way people still feel engaged, they feel like they're learning things, and they feel like there's value in a role at your company. Even if someone's making a six-figure salary, they're doing well brokering freight, they're gonna start looking around if they feel like they're going nowhere professionally. I guess, like, in a nutshell, my main point there is if they're not getting training from you, they're gonna go find it somewhere else.
That point is also something that cannot be overstated, right? Especially with the generation now entering the workforce. They have a take no crap attitude because they know that they can go down the street and find another job, which it might be entry level and it might suck at the first part, but they can find something else if they're not getting what they need. Can you talk a little bit about the value that training like Slync has maybe for those long haulers in your brokerage, those middle to upper managers who have maybe been on the sales floor, they're a pod leader or they've got a small team underneath them and they've been there for a decade or longer and they're comfortable, they like where they are, but maybe they're not necessarily acting or actively seeking out more training. Does this still have value for them even if they're comfortable?
Oh, absolutely. I think a really good example of that is management training. I mean, a lot of the times in brokerages, what you do for managers is, well, you take your highest performing carrier rep or customer rep and you put them into a management position. Unfortunately, they don't get a lot of training going into that management position. So even if you've been doing brokerage for 10 years and you've been really successful and comfortable, like this new role that's been thrust upon you, you might not have the skills needed to do well in that new role. So folks, even when they're like 10, 15 years into their career, still need training depending on what specific role they're in or what they're going into or what just new challenges they're facing.
And so when we're looking at Slync itself, how does that approach training?
Yeah, so our approach to training is, I'm going to hit on a couple of things here. We really believe that training needs to be engaging, relevant, and I'd say actionable. You have to be able to take that training and actually apply it to your job. You know, sticking somebody in front of a computer or in a lecture for an hour doesn't do that. I don't care how many times you're told how to have a conversation with a driver, you don't fully understand it until you actually do it. So, like, while we do have a video component to our training in Slync, we also have activities and simulations and shadowing to really help people acclimate to their roles. And the other thing I touch on here is that we're big believers that learning is a process, not an event. So we're in Slync, we're not just building out, hey, here's 2 weeks of training and then you're done. We're building out specific learning paths for folks so that you can use Slync on day one in your brokerage and continue through your learning journey all the way until you leave.
And of course, half the battle with getting people trained is getting them to buy into the value of the training. What has the response been so far from people who are using Slync and since it's been launched? Has it been really positive, and are you seeing your numbers of users start to tick up?
Yeah, so we launched relatively recently. Like, we launched our pilot program, I'd say, back in October. So we're currently onboarding pilot customers. We're still very much MVP, but the feedback we're getting is great. People are able to take the training that they're getting and apply it to their jobs in a way that just hasn't been as easy to do prior to.
And if people want to learn more about Slync and really reach out, how can they do that?
Yeah, so they can reach out to me. The best way to reach me is probably email. It's nick@poweredbykinetic.com, or reach out to any of the folks at Metaphora, and anyone will be happy to walk you through.
Awesome. Well, Nick, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Real quick, also, is this a program that's for everyone, or is there a certain size for the company?
It's for everyone. Like current state, we are really focused on brokerage and also tech companies, but we're going to be moving into different market segments as we go. But yeah, right now, any size broker and also freight tech companies.
Awesome. Well, Nick, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Definitely something that a lot of companies can utilize today.
Thanks for having me on.
Right now, we're going to take one more look at the weather with our very own meteorologist, Kaylee Nix.
Right, Anthony, welcome back to this check of the weather. And as we talked about earlier, we're watching those severe storms move very quickly to the east. And what can't be understated is the severe wind threat that's going to exist behind them, specifically through central and eastern Tennessee and down into the northern parts of Georgia and Alabama. So because of that, we not only have to worry about the tornado potential this morning, but also the very strong wind gusts that are going to be coming on the backside of the storms. Let's take a look at the map right now. Two things that are up here, and it's kind of this mess of colors, right? So what we've got going on is we've got our watchtower advisories in place. That tornado watch is going to be that purple one that's over the top. But laid underneath that is going to be our maximum wind gusts that are estimated to occur this afternoon and into this evening. Some spots here you can see specifically along that I-40 corridor from Memphis eastward into Nashville, I-65 down from Nashville to Huntsville, and then 24 down from Nashville here into Chattanooga. We could be seeing wind gusts upwards of 70 miles an hour, getting close to that 75 to 80 range in some spots there. And with that, sustained winds, even without the gusts, going to stay well into the 45 to 50 plus range here. So because of that, we have high wind warnings in place across the eastern mountains of Tennessee. That's from Chattanooga here up along the I-75 corridor that is up towards Knoxville, I-40 east to west into Nashville from Knoxville, and then out towards Memphis as well. Those high wind warnings going to be super important for drivers who are moving north and south today, here from Chattanooga towards Nashville, Chattanooga to Knoxville, or Huntsville, north-south, really anywhere, because there'll be crosswinds. They'll be blowing from the west to the east. So drivers that are there really need to be paying attention, especially as you come through. It's really hilly here in these eastern parts of Tennessee. So what happens is that wind gets focused along those valleys in between the hills. You could be driving along just fine, enter one of those valleys, and then get hit with the gust, knocks you right off the road. So just be super cautious out there today. Those winds are going to start behind the cold front. So they'll begin from west to east this afternoon and then linger in through the evening hours tonight before finally calming down. Another thing we've got to worry about is the saturated ground that's in place. So we could be watching power outages as well as down trees. The straight line winds going to have the potential to knock over some buildings and cause just as much damage as we would see if there were tornadoes as well. So be paying attention to that this afternoon through this evening and make sure that you are in your safe place when you need to be. Right now, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now. The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
From the truckload quoting page within TieTMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TieTMS can optimize your quoting process.
Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. Drilling Deep is the place where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you have to drill to get oil and you have to get oil to make diesel, so that's why we call it Drilling Deep. Drilling Deep drops every Friday on FreightWaves TV and all available podcast platforms.
Hey, Anthony.
Yo.
If you have the time, we could do a show here.
South, I'm almost finished with the solve. I failed on air.
Yeah. Listen,
embarrassing.
You know, like some people take failure as more like a obsessive challenge type deal, and
but South, I had 2 minutes.
Yeah,
I can do this in under a minute.
I know, we've all seen you and everything, but you know, you couldn't do it when it mattered. I think that's what you need to.
I can do it under a minute, South.
You know, but we just can't keep wasting valuable FreightWaves TV screen time with you in this.
Look! I'm doing it, South.
Yeah, okay. All right, put it down, Anthony.
Hello, everyone. This is Economy Lately, and I'm Anthony Smith, Chief Economist here at FreightWaves, and I'm joined by the one and only South Turk. And
hey, now,
South, it's been a time in the economy.
Oh yeah, it usually is. It usually is always a time.
It's always a time, and I mean, there's some stuff that we got to talk about. You know, some stuff we got to cover. I mean, it hasn't been a huge week in developments and macro openings, but really, I mean, we're going to talk about durable good orders. We're talking about the initial jobs claims and market changes. But really, when it comes down to, it's just like this expectation and the reasons for concern and reasons for optimism. And I've been on calls and I tell people, you know what, if you're optimistic, I can see why. You know, you can point out a few different things to say, hey, this is why I'm optimistic. I'm like, you know what, you're pretty, you know, spot on with your reasons for optimism. And then there's people like, hey, you know what, I'm really pessimistic about how it looks right now, and here's why. And I think they all have a lot of great points. But then you kind of come together and it's just like, it all comes down to timing. And that's what it's all about, South.
Okay, timing. Yeah.
And speaking of timing, I can do this, South, in under a minute.
All right,
easily.
Okay. All right, the economy has to, okay. All right.
All right, so I guess we'll jump into it.
Yeah. Why don't we do that, Anthony?
All right, so let's just jump into it then, starting it off with our first thing, and that's going to be durable good orders. And so what we saw was that there was a 4.5% downward movement for the month, but really when we're looking at what happened within the report, there was some volatile movement. So we're looking at the non-defense aircraft parts. That was down 54.6%. So that's going to be a wild and volatile one, just much like our buddy Christian Thomas. And we also saw that transportation equipment was down as well, 13.3%. So these are industries or segments, of course, that matter to us because we have to haul them and it's going to matter to freight. But really, the timing of it all really kind of. The cube just comes to me, so you know.
All right.
I'll put it down. It's fine. But we're looking at some of those industries. It's like showing that there is still demand. So when we look at computers and other appliances, things like that, there was some growth overall. So overall, there is still some momentum happening within manufacturing. It's just that when you look below the report's headline numbers, there's going to be some volatile movements like aircrafts and stuff like that.
Okay.
Next thing we have to talk about is the ISM PMI. So what we saw there was that, hey, it's still in contraction. So we're sticking with the theme of upstream activity and manufacturing. And when we look at the ISM PMI, we see that there was a change to 47.7 percentage points, still in contraction territory. New orders did tick up slightly to 47.0, still in contraction territory. But one of the interesting things that came up was prices now at 51.3. That's up 6.8% for the month. And South, that is a pretty substantial movement. I mean, we're looking at the overall changes. The new orders component is really something that you're going to have to kind of take into account. I mean, when you look at new orders, it leads into production, then production goes into shipment, and then it all comes back down to freight. And South, that's what it all comes down to. I mean, this is freight waves, not, Rubik's Cubes waves.
Yeah, there's like meetings for this, right?
For
You're
what?
anonymous.
Like Cubers?
Yeah,
Like
well, kind of. Yeah, for Cubers. Yeah, it's called Cubers Anonymous.
That's what they call them, the Cubers.
Cubers Anonymous.
I want to join the Cubers Club. That's what I'm going to do. Remember that movie, The Cube?
Yeah, The Cube. Yeah, Canadian horror indie classic.
Yeah. Oh man, that was a classic. We got to get back on track here.
All right,
so the other big thing that we saw for the week was industrial jobs claims still remained in the below 200,000 mark. So it's still very tight, really, overall. So jobless claims are low, and that would be one of the areas that people would point to as, hey, this is why the economy is doing well. The job market can support it. We're still under 200,000. This is like the 5th or 6th or 7th week straight that it's been under 200,000. So that's a good sign. But really, South, when we're looking at what's going on in the freight market, I mean, it's kind of toxic how I think some companies approach it, because it's like, hey, the market's changing and it's different. It's a different market than we saw in 2022. We all know that. It is what it is. It's just obvious. But the thing is like, especially my hat goes off to truck drivers because they get the short end of the stick all the time, especially the smaller operations, owner-operators, things like that. But really brokers as well, because if you're in a sales position and you were just, making tons of money for your company throughout this, the pandemic and a little bit after the pandemic, but now the market changes and they're kind of pointing at you like, hey, you know what, you got to change your quota. We're going to bump up requirements and this is on you. It's not the market, but really it's the market. And it's kind of toxic to make it seem like it's the person, and layoffs happen. I know it's unavoidable sometimes. I mean, it's avoidable, but sometimes it can be unavoidable. And, it's just really how you go about it that kind of changes everything.
Now, when you say toxic, do you mean like Britney Spears toxic or like the Toxic Avenger?
Toxic Avenger?
Yeah, you know what? Never mind. Don't worry about it.
Is there a Toxic Avenger that I haven't been paying attention to? Is that what Marvel's doing?
Just YouTube it later.
Are we talking about Palestine, Ohio? What's going on here?
I cannot talk about that according to my lawyer. So,
were you involved with that?
Remember, we were. You know what? Never mind.
I don't know what you're talking about.
All right. Yeah.
I have never been to Ohio in my life, but I will be there in Cleveland, Ohio, for our upcoming Future of Supply Chain South. Are we allowed to go back to the state?
Future of Supply Chain.
Are we allowed to go back? Can FreightWaves take us there?
Tickets on sale now. Go to freightwaves.com/events.
Be there, be square.
Yeah. Or cubed.
Cubed. See you on the next episode.
Hey everybody, this is Thomas Watson, enterprise trucking carrier expert here at FreightWaves, telling you about my show, Loaded and Rolling. Now, it involves trucking topics for large carriers and even small ones that wish to be large. Anything that impacts trucking, you can get it there. You can catch us every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern on tv.freightwaves.com. We do it live.
From the truckload quoting page within TieTMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TieTMS can optimize your quoting process.
And welcome back to FreightWaves Now. It's time for one final check of the weather for your Friday. Of course, we're focused on this pretty big storm system across the eastern half of the country right now. But because it's moving quickly and we'll get out of here pretty fast, the rest of the weekend's looking nice for the majority of us. So let's take one final look at the radar right now. We can see that system moving fairly quickly up to the east-northeast. Pretty robust, heavy rainfall, those strong winds, and on the cold side, that mixed precipitation and some snow moving through. But it is moving fairly fast. That's center of circulation, which is right now right along that western Kentucky, Tennessee area. It's moving up to the north-northeast. This will clear the precipitation out through the Great Lakes area and up through the northeast by tomorrow morning into your Saturday afternoon. Behind that, across the southern parts of the country, New Mexico into Texas and down here in the deep south, we're looking at a pretty calm weekend on tap with temperatures sitting about their seasonable levels in those mid-60s. Further out to the west, we're also going to get a little bit of a break from that heavy snowfall that's impacting California, Nevada, and Utah, and get them a little break for the weekend as well. Temperatures back there going to be on the colder side, but still within their seasonable values. But good to finally get a little bit of precipitation break out there, as we talked about earlier this week. Extreme snowfall going on in the mountains of California. Further up towards the northwest as well, getting a couple breaks as these last few remaining snow showers move in. We'll see a little bit of a calmer weekend on tap for them as well. Other than that, though, by the time that we start next week, we'll see that area of Pacific moisture that is start to ramp back up into California, driving another round of heavy snow and rain for the southern parts. That'll be our next major storm that looks to impact the area starting off next week as well. Till then, go ahead and get out and enjoy your nicer weekend that's on tap safely after that big storm has passed. And we'll talk a little bit more about what the weather's going to do next week when we come back on Monday for FreightWaves Now. Right now, we're going to toss things back over to Isaiah. He's got one final check of what's trending on social media.
That's right, everyone. We have made it to Friday. We are so close to the weekend, and the next few days should look pretty nice, according to Kaylee. But one thing I want to talk about, we have a new chart. We know we talk a lot about charts here at FreightWaves, and we have a new one that I'd like to introduce you to. This is the TFI. This is also known as the Tooth Fairy Index. Now, basically what you're going to see right here is the line in green is the average tooth fairy givings per tooth, and then the line in the purple is the S&P 500 each year. Now, this chart goes all the way back to about 2001, and you can see that the average price then was it was between $1 and $2. But now here in 2023, we are above $6. It's $6.23 for the average tooth now that kids are getting from their parents. I mean, the tooth fairy, of course, the tooth fairy. And so it just goes to show that inflation is hitting everything, even teeth, even what the amount of money that the tooth fairy is giving out to kids. So just wanted to show that cool little chart with you all. And now I'm going to switch things up just a little bit. And I found this video this morning of a girl in a jet, and she gets put through a lot of G-force. Take a look at this.
How about that? Pretty cool. Oh, that's so awesome. How you doing? You feeling good? Yep. All right, we pulled 6 Gs. You want to do one high G turn and go back? Yeah. Like a Red Bull Air Race turn? Yeah. Okay. So in the Red Bull Air Race, the most time we did a vertical turn. So it'd be just like a half Cuban, okay? We'll get going fast. You got your head braced perfectly right there. Yep. Just tighten up your neck muscles, tighten up your legs. I'm going to try to put like 10 Gs on you, okay? Okay. So here we go. Tighten up your legs, tighten up your neck. 3, 2, 1, go. All the way around. Available. Looking for the recovery gate.
That's what Christian Thomas looks like when he's had one too many frozen margaritas. That's all I've got for this edition of Social Roundabout. Right now, I'm going to toss things back over to Bill Priestley with our roundtable.
And welcome into the roundtable. How do you top that?
The only half Cuban I want is a sandwich, preferably, not the G-forces that were sustained.
To his tooth fairy effect, I've got a 4-year-old, and I'm not really looking forward to that.
2001, the global war on teeth, not terrorism.
No.
1980, $1 a tooth.
Yeah.
$2,000 a tooth.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden, 2021, $6. But you know, I'm an uncle. I tell them, hey, I got $5 a tooth back when I was young. What are you getting?
Well, what if the fillings, maybe? Maybe it's a filling issue. We're using better materials.
Gentlemen, let's move on to our roundtable subject. So we've obviously seen a bit of a pendulum shift recently with freight moving from West Coast to East Coast through a variety of factors, one of which being, of course, the ILWU, labor talks, things being uncertain out there. In certain ways, people saw, of course, what happened when you had 106 ships out in San Pedro Bay, so they started moving to the East Coast. So let's take this to another level and say, what would happen if we simply ignored the West Coast and everybody started going east? Andrew Lockwood, earlier last week, mentioned the fact that it was cheaper to go from the Pacific Ocean to Houston than it was to go from the Pacific Ocean to LA and then rail to Houston. Donnie, I know you've got some charts here to kind of express this. I have no idea where we're going with this, but go ahead and.
Well, I'll just back what you said. We'll throw up the first chart here, and we have a chart in Sonar's the intermodal spread from China to the North America West Coast or the East Coast. And like he said, there's been a big battle: East Coast, West Coast, East Coast, West Coast. What color do you wear? I don't know. But this chart right here, we use Savannah, and it's basically the boat coming across the ocean, take that rate, take the rail rate from LAX going to Chicago, and then take the boat going over to Savannah, and then the rail rate going to Chicago. And what's cheaper? And there's a little white line in that chart. That's zero. When it's above zero, the East Coast is more expensive. When it's below zero, the West Coast is more expensive. So here, early on, earlier this year, we could see where it was cheap. It was more expensive to go to the West Coast, which would push freight to the East Coast. And now it's shifting back where the West Coast is going to be more expensive. But as a shipper, you normally pick one or the other because you build some infrastructure around this and get into habits. Well, we thought that here after COVID, where everybody was shipping to the East Coast, that they would eventually go back to the West Coast just because it was cheaper. And they will go wherever it's cheaper. So right now, it might be pushing more freight to the East Coast again. But whatever that word is.
Apocalyptic.
Yes. Scenario. Yeah. Let's go to the next chart that I have up. The big red square there on the top left is actually the Port of New York, and it's new because you see all those negative 30s and negative 29% losses year over year. Well, the number I want you to pay attention to is that 248,000 and the 190,000 and the 194,000 for Port of Los Angeles. If you take Port of Long Beach and Port of Los Angeles alone and add those up, it's almost 400,000. And these are the TEUs that are crossing through customs each this month. So here, Long Beach and LAX alone are probably bigger than 3 of the largest ports here on the East Coast of the U.S. So if you cut LAX off and you move this freight over to the East Coast, there's not the infrastructure. It's like we love electric cars right now, and it's all the big boom. But if everybody went out and got an electric car today, our power grid would shut down. The infrastructure is not there. But hang on, give me one more second. All right. The one port that really probably has the room to grow, or is going to have, is the Port of Savannah. They had the high-speed cranes delivered in February, I believe February 9th. They were delivered. Yeah. They're not in place. Yeah. They built a rail system to get those containers out of the port up to either Northwest Atlanta or Calhoun, Georgia. And they've got all this going in. They can handle more, but really all these ports are full. So these boats will be stacking up outside of these ports. And on the West Coast, it would be a massive kill of jobs, not only just trucking, but even the support, the fuel stations, the service guys, the tow truck drivers. It would kill all that. It would be devastating.
Thomas?
Complete and total catastrophic collapse of the U.S. supply chain.
I think that was where you were going to go in the first place.
In the event, let's say an earthquake occurred, the California big one that they keep talking about, you would see a situation where I think California is the 5th largest economy if it stood alone on its own. Right. I mean, when we're talking about the fact of how much, as much as people make fun of California for their costs and things and their policies, in the event that things stopped flowing into California, it would have a trickle-down effect across the entire nation. Retail stores would go out, supplies. I mean, when you hear truckers make the joke that the economy can't survive without trucks for 72 hours, that's part of moving things from the ports of California. The supply chain was not designed. So in the event that we do lose these ports, we do lose access, whether through a natural disaster or other unforeseen event, it would basically lead to the catastrophic collapse of the world's largest economy.
Well put. Now let's put it back. Let's put it back in the hands of, okay, so say for instance, if things did shift more towards the East Coast more than the West Coast, doesn't it then make sense that shipping freight from the East Coast to the West Coast becomes more expensive because there's not as many people out in the West? Obviously, you've got 80% of the population. It lives, I think, east of the Mississippi River, if I'm not mistaken. So then it just would be a lot more of a burden for freight to go from east to west as opposed to west to east.
Well, if it was a small and consistent shift, that's one thing.
Yeah.
It could work and settle its way out. But like I say, if you just killed California, like I said, there's no infrastructure over here.
Right.
So the boats would pull up and they'd be like number 199 in line.
Yeah.
And it might take 6 months to get unloaded. And like he said, everything would collapse. You couldn't get goods to the stores. But like I say, give Savannah 5 more years. They're building a new freeway system around. They're trying to get the truck congestion out of there. And if others start to do that, as they start to grow, then it actually could be a good shift, and it might work out very well.
And you're hearing about a lot of different improvements. Port of Jacksonville has announced last year that they're deepening their channel. They're almost done with that. Port of Virginia just said that they can now take, I think, the largest ships and go 2 ways in that there as well. So yeah, it seems like there is a bit of a shift here moving towards the East Coast.
I think Houston is deepening their channels right now too. So they're all putting the infrastructure in because they know some of this is going to happen.
Yeah.
There's a mass exodus from California right now. So a lot of companies are getting out of there. A lot of people are getting out of there. It's more expensive to operate. UP might build, and I wish UP would put a terminal in like Las Vegas, but they're going to possibly put it up there in Salt Lake City. So, but they're going to get that freight out of there and into a different state where you don't have to run where the higher diesel fuel prices are. So there's kind of this really mass exodus going on. If it goes slow and we can keep up with it, we can work things out. But if it was just a quick cut, then it'd be awful.
I mean, I'd say operational. Let's imagine that a labor strike occurs, the ports of LA and Long Beach. What you'd see now is migrations towards SeaTac and Oakland, unless those were also impacted. But you got to think about
that labor is the entire West Coast.
So if the entire West Coast goes offline, imagine you're in a situation where what would you do? You can't go up to the ports. You go up through Mexico. Well, now their Laredo cross-border is overwhelmed because all of the border crossings, especially near El Paso, Laredo, and San Diego. And then so what would plan B then? Let's go through the canals and let's try to do Houston, Savannah, Jacksonville, Norfolk, New York, New Jersey. They get quickly overwhelmed. So then you think to yourself, all right, well, can the rail lines handle this movement from east to west? Well, there's only so many major rail fares, that are moving across it. So would we put it on a truck? Would it be the great gold rush, going back to feed, ports of California and those other locations? It doesn't make sense. It's so hard to completely imagine what would happen if it did stop because, like you said, you just don't have the capacity available to suddenly take all this stuff east and just send it west. So much of our infrastructure is built around that port. Going west, it goes on the rail, it goes back east. It is quite an amazing thing to try and wrap your head around, just the level of disruptions in terms of, it's such a center point, it's such a fulcrum of our supply chain. So yeah, operationally speaking, I guess we would have the gold rush again and just hitch the wagons and go back west. Just find what you can get.
I disagree with you.
Okay, all right.
We've already seen this happen. This is exactly what happened in COVID. There was no trucking issue. They blamed it on trucking. It was an issue at the ports alone, and they were almost not shut down, but they were slowed down.
Yeah.
And the ships were waiting out front, and that started to occur. They started pushing their freights to the East Coast. We've already seen a large portion of this happen. Now we're talking about a total shutdown. It wouldn't be very long. They kept it shut down.
Right.
But we've already had this happen once, and I believe with what we've already seen and being caught off guard with COVID, that we would bounce back and do it better the second time.
Real quick, do you think that this is a pendulum shift, or do you think that do you have to guess as to which coast you're going to go to, or do you make a decision as to which one you want to go to from here on out?
I think right now it's still a coin flip of what's because of pricing, but I think if issues continue to happen on the West Coast, they're going to get sick of it, and they're just going to pay some of the higher prices, and even if the East Coast is more expensive, they're going to start moving it to get rid of the
contrarian route, land routes from Mexico. We're seeing a lot of movements here.
we see more nearshoring. It doesn't matter if it's the West or the East Coast. I'm thinking cross-border movements, other crossings get open.
You're going to send the ship to Laredo?
Yeah, we're land ships now, sir.
Oh boy, here we go. That's going to do it for a roundtable. We'll have to wait for hopefully an apocalyptic event doesn't happen. Back over to Kaylee with our last check of headlines.
Thanks, guys. And if that apocalyptic event does happen, I'm sure you'll find it on FreightWaves.com, along with these other top stories. Digital freight brokerage Transfix announced that CEO and President Lily Shen is stepping down after 5 years with the company, effective immediately. She will be replaced by co-founder and chief technology officer Jonathan Salama. Shen will remain as an advisor during the transition, and Salama will remain a member of the Transfix board of directors. Shen is credited with driving Transfix's platform strategy and product offerings over her tenure, but she also oversaw the planning and withdrawal of an initial public offering that was set to go last fall. Freight forwarder Kuehne + Nagel took a hit to its logistics profits for the fourth quarter of 2022, but still reported its second best quarter ever, despite plunging market conditions. Operating income for the quarter dipped 43% year over year. Earnings before taxes and interest came in at $685.5 million, just behind the same period set in 2021. The freight forwarder saw a huge drop in operating profits, specifically on their air logistics side, with that sector sliding down 50% year over year to $277 million. Volumes were also down 15% lower than 2021. And the U.S. Postal Service has awarded another major contract for electric delivery vehicles in its quest to electrify 66,000 units by 2028. USPS has awarded Ford an order for 9,250 commercial off-the-shelf battery electric vehicles, with deliveries expected to begin this December. The vehicles will be 100% electric and domestically sourced, manufactured in Kansas City. 3 unnamed EV charging suppliers have also been awarded contracts to purchase 14,000 charging stations for the Postal Service. And you can find details of those stories and more over on FreightWaves.com and our FreightWaves app. If you're watching us on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe, and head on over to tv.freightwaves.com for everything else. We're going to toss things back over to the wall. Thomas and Donnie are here for one final carrier update.
Thanks so much, Kaylee. Welcome back to the wall. It's our final look for this carrier update on this wonderful Friday. And this is a fun lane. Denver to Dallas, 793 miles. It's kind of a weird one because we're in a tweener zone, you know, in terms of transit, but sometimes you can get a good rate out of it.
Well, you got to remember, Denver, Colorado, what's within 500 miles of it? So there is no
Grand Junction.
Yeah, and I've been there. I ate Valentine's Day dinner there one night. It's a very small place. So no, in 500 miles, you know, Montana and Wisconsin, no. So when you deal with Denver, it's going to be, for the most part, what you're interested in, tweener or long haul. And this is one area where they get a lot of freight into Denver. Now, the reason I brought Denver up is because I didn't get to my map, but I have the WRI in here, and Denver finally broke 5 on the WRI. So there might be significant change going on in Denver. Let's check some of the rates. Denver headed out to Dallas. Well, there might be some effect. It's picking back up a little bit here. It's $1.36 a mile. And that's because Denver absorbs a lot more freight than it puts out. And the reason why is because Denver is the center hub that supplies Sheridan, Wyoming, and the eastern portions of Wyoming and Montana, and the mountainous areas of the ski resorts, Vail, Aspen, all that, it comes out of Denver and is shipped in. Now, for that to happen, you got a lot of freight that goes into Denver. It's warehoused in Denver and then shipped into these smaller areas. It's the key port for that region. Just like Salt Lake City is the key port for the western part of the Rockies. Grand Junction, coin flip, it's right there on the Utah-Colorado border. You could come from Denver or down from Salt Lake City. But in between, you got, western Montana, West Yellowstone, Billings. A lot of that may come out of Salt Lake City. So that's how those two hubs operate, Denver, Salt Lake City. So coming out of there, even if there is some significant change, you got to keep an eye on that. It might be rough because there's a lot of people who want out of that city and they're willing to take low rates. So where carriers mess up is we see that WRI increasing, rejection rates increasing, but they may not be watching this, and they don't increase their rates as we see right here, and they miss out on opportunities.
Yeah, look at that confidence score too. 5 of 5. Look at the spread between that. You can almost tell this market settled into such that you know what you're going to get coming.
Yeah, and so right now, even though it's jumped up to I think 5.04 in the WRI, it's still $1.36 leaving there going back to Denver. So you better make your money going in. If you have, and the way it would probably work out is you should probably have contracted freight going into Denver, and this is your spot rate coming out. So to burn through these a little bit quick because we're running out of time, Denver to Dallas, $1.36. Next chart, Denver to Los Angeles, it's not headed up either, still kind of been kind of steady, $1.39, but it's 300 more miles. Next chart here, Denver headed to Kansas City. This is probably the way that you should do it. $1.31 get to Kansas City, but from Kansas City to get back in the Midwest, you can probably get 60, 70 cents a mile higher, maybe 230, 240. So now you're only going to have to run 600 miles, and then you can get a better rate to get those rates up instead of running 1,100, 800, 900 miles at $1.31. So we've run out of time here. I had a few more, but we'll leave it where we be. Be careful going into Denver. You better get your money going in because it's going to be cheap coming out.
Book it early coming out. Take the losses when you can. Thanks so much, Donnie. That's going to be it for today. Y'all have a wonderful weekend. We're going to kick it, toss it back over. That's all, folks, to Kaylee and Anthony.
Something. It's back to us. And we're done here for your Friday, but plenty more coming up on FreightWaves TV, including your Friday Nooner with Dooner. Well, the truck is here in just about an hour.
That's right. So we're going to have that coming up in just about an hour. We're also going to have an episode of Fuller Speed Ahead. And we had Mario O'Connell on a little bit earlier on this morning, and she'll be on again with Running on Ice.
And don't worry, Net Zero Carbon drops today at 2:30, and John Kingston is here with Drilling Deep to finish it out at 3 o'clock. While you're checking up and catching up on all of your FreightWaves TV content, head on over to live.freightwaves.com and get registered for our next virtual event. Less than 2 weeks away from Supply Chain Meets FinTech, and yes, this one does in fact include another giveaway. We'll see you guys on Monday starting at 9 a.m. Have a great weekend and stay safe out there with all that severe weather.
Catch your Nooner with Dooner right here on FreightWaves TV live every